Hi guys, Tom Barclay here, back for another video after sunning myself in sunny Tenerife on half term with the family for a week. Obviously missed 3 games during that time, unfortunately, but in a way it feels like the narrative is pretty similar to when I left, because once again we've seen a couple of good results followed by a bad one, and sort of momentum being gained, being checked by a sort of somewhat demoralising defeat, which has kind of left the situation being perhaps more questions surrounding this young team that Ange Postecoglou has than answers, which was very similar to ahead of the international break after that sort of crushing defeat at Brighton after 5 straight wins. I think overall there was a lot to be excited about, which I've consistently said throughout this season, but it's fair enough for fans to be left frustrated, I suppose, by this inconsistency, which you're going to get with young players, and you're probably going to get with this style of play that Postecoglou likes to employ. But it doesn't sort of lessen the pain, I suppose, of a defeat like they saw at Selhurst Park the other day any more. Very frustrating. I won't go into too much into depth of those 3 games because, to be honest, I caught the highlights rather than watching them being away, and I read up about them. It seems like West Ham, similar to a few of the other games like Brentford, where they've suffered a sort of early setback and come back firing and won very convincingly. So overall, that was pretty impressive. Europa League, once again, pretty similar, a narrow win, not exactly like a firing all cylinders kind of victory over AZ Alkmaar. But he's obviously fielded young players. They've won 3 games out of 3 in that competition. You cannot argue with that at all, really. And that's put them in a fantastic position to sort of continue to do that and continue to give great experience to young players for the rest of the sort of group, the league stage. Because, if they didn't get through at this point, you'd be absolutely stunned. And that particular game felt like, Tottenham fans well aware of Mikey Moore's talents already, but it felt like the wider footballing world became aware of just how much potential this young kid has from that particular performance. That seemed to be the standout one. And then Palace, they hadn't won a game all season in the Premier League. They went there. They not only lost to Palace, but they couldn't score against them. They had a few chances. Maddison unlucky with that shot or a great save from Henderson. But to be honest, if it weren't for some great saves from Vicario, perhaps Spurs were lucky not to lose by more. So can totally understand why that's a frustrating defeat for Spurs fans, and one that sort of once again sort of throws into doubt for anyone who has that sort of mind of doubting Ange Postecoglou's way. Sort of adds further fuel to that argument, as I've said a few times really this season. So once again, looking ahead to tonight's game against Man City, it feels like another big game for Postecoglou. That is a recurring theme. I don't mean to keep saying it over and over again. It's just, I don't know if it's the nature of the fixtures. They're playing so many games, playing in Europe. I think it's more to the fact that off the back of the end of last season and the way it ended, there just seems to be a lot of moments early in this season where he's having to convince some fans and the wider footballing world that his approach can work. And when he starts to have a few results where it feels like it's working, and then something comes along where it really doesn't, and then it sort of causes this kind of reflecting on those victories and wondering if they were lucky, or if they got away with certain things, or if it just dropped for them, and sort of reassessing how effective it actually is, which I don't think is really fair, but I can sort of see why people do that. And so once again, going to Man City at home tonight in the League Cup, it feels like a big game. Obviously, it's the ultimate in opportunity knocking. They haven't won a trophy, obviously, in such a long time, since 2008 when they won the League Cup. And yes, it's Man City. I'm sure when fans saw that draw come through, there was disappointment over having the best team, arguably in the world, draw them at this stage. But they're at home. City, we know, Pep's already talked about you're not going to waste energy on this competition. So he's basically going to play, his not main starters. He's going to play the kids, as they say, albeit not literally his kids. As Ange pointed out in his press conference, they are good players. There's a reason why they're at Man City. Not quite as much rotation, perhaps, as he would have liked, Pep, because of his injuries. De Bruyne is out. Walker, a whole bunch of great players are injured at the moment. But nonetheless, a great opportunity for Tottenham tonight. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like he might go quite strong. And we'll wait to see if that actually turns out to be the case. Perhaps as a reaction to the Palace defeat. And we'll come on to team selection or possible likely lineup in a while. But it does feel like a big opportunity tonight. And hopefully he'll pick a strong lineup. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's quite likely to try and make it happen, which will be music to the ears of a lot of fans, particularly my good friend Marcus Buckland, who hosts our podcast, The Tottenham Way. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. Who often bangs on about this particular subject of Tottenham managers playing weakened sides when it comes to the cup competitions. It's a proper bugbear of his, as it is for many fans of clubs, because that's just often what teams do these days. They play the weakened teams. But it sounds like hopefully he'll go quite strong. So we'll see. But on that note, unsurprisingly, looking through the quotes that Ange gave ahead of the match today in his pre-match press conference, he was talking about winning a cup not being a panacea, not being the sort of cure to all ills that Tottenham may have, even though fans are obviously so desperate to win something. And he pointed to Erik ten Hag, who obviously got sacked during this time that I was away, and saying how obviously Erik won a trophy in his two full seasons at Man United, or the last 2 seasons for Man United, and obviously got sacked anyway. And I don't know, I think that's not disingenuous, but it's not the full story, is it? I mean, they obviously did win that, and it was a fantastic win over Man City, particularly in the FA Cup last season. I was at the League Cup win the year before when they beat Newcastle, and they were worthy winners. But when you watch Man United play pretty much throughout his tenure, and particularly in the last sort of year or so, you just didn't know what they were trying to do, really. They might have pulled off these one-off amazing performances, which seemed to come out of nowhere. But there was no sort of discernible identity, no discernible sort of path they were plotting, where they were going. It was just often trying to keep it tight and hope for something wonderful from an individual to happen to try and win the game. That just doesn't feel like, in the modern era, a sustainable way of trying to get anywhere, to try and win anything. Maybe a one-off cup, as was proven, but not a league title, which is obviously what Man United need to be doing. And I think it's relevant to Tottenham, because obviously similar start case, I guess, with Juan Ramos when he won the League Cup back in 2008, and obviously then the 2 points from 8 games. It was a similar story. I don't quite remember it being how it was, because I wasn't really covering them and I'm not a fan. I'd have to go back and actually look at that to see whether there were question marks over a sort of style and identity. But that was less of a thing back then. It's very much a thing at the moment. I remember actually asking Ange about that specific thing and the scrutiny that was around Ten Hag ahead of the Man United game when they won 3-0, obviously at Old Trafford, however many weeks ago. And he was saying how it's the pressure on managers today that you not only have to get results, you've got to do it in a way that is, aesthetically pleasing. You've got to have an identity. You've got all these things. You've got to be a good communicator. You've got to do all these things. And he's right. There is a lot more. I think the bar is higher from what we expect from our managers and their teams these days. But there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why they get paid so much money. That's part of the reason, because of all these demands that are on the team. And I think if he was questioning whether, if Ten Hag was in charge of Spurs and had gone through something similar and won a couple of trophies, would the scrutiny be the same? Saying, I'm not sure, basically hinting that he didn't think it would be. And there is no doubt that the scrutiny, the world's sort of focus, is much more on Man United. They are pretty much the biggest club in the world, definitely the biggest club in England, and it is different to Tottenham. But I do think that if Ten Hag had been in charge of Spurs, he'd won a cup, but there was still no sort of discernible sort of strategy really from game to game, and they won't seem to be going anywhere. The pressure, maybe not externally, but at least from outside of Tottenham, in the way that people seem to be really invested in Man United, even if they're not Man United fans, or maybe that's a media thing, I don't know. But particularly from Spurs' point of view, the fans, they would be all over him, and it'd be the same. So I don't really buy that. But I also know that winning a cup, obviously, it would be huge. And would be a big part of this rebuild that Ange is trying to produce. He was interesting when he was talking about the time it takes for managers to come in to do a complete turnaround, saying that pretty much no one does it in 15 months, apart from Pep, and pointed to Arsenal's sort of the time it's taken for Arteta, the time it's taken for took for Jurgen Klopp. And yeah, he's right, totally right. But then also with Arteta, he did win the FA Cup early doors. So that really gave him a good, that gave him sort of breathing space when he was trying to make all those changes and the sort of bumps in the road that they had early on, and not just early on, like within a year. So you do feel like, on that note, it would be a big thing for this, if this is to work long term and turn them into sort of serial, Premier League title contenders, as Postecoglou said he wants to transform Tottenham into, that winning a cup, it would be more than just sort of breathing space. It would be, for some fans, it would be the pinnacle, and maybe it is for Tottenham. We'll see. He also talks about how they're struggling at the moment, his players, in difficult moments because they lack maturity and leadership, which are quite bold comments and quite honest comments about his side. Although, with him, it sort of comes from a genuine place. It's not trying to make a sort of point, I suppose, about his players. At least I don't think it is. And he talked about the fact that you either buy that in or you develop it within. And his approach, he wants to develop it from within, even though it can can produce some very difficult moments which nobody enjoys, including him, which is referencing the Palace game. But he feels like you need to go through these moments to see how they react. And he talks once again about the ceiling of this team being so high, and being just hugely excited of what they can produce in time, but that sort of suggesting that it will take time and there will be these difficult moments. One might say that's again sort of manager speak. There are times where he does kind of traverse that line of, is he just saying that, and he's saying it in such a sort of smart way that we're all kind of giving him a pass on it, and we should be a bit more sort of, no, hold on, this wasn't good enough. But I am again, maybe I'm swayed by his rhetoric at times, but when I listen to him speak, he just seems to talk a lot of sense. And once again, you've got young players, they're going to be inconsistent. You're going to have performances like this crop up every so often. And if that is the direction he wants to go down, then fans are just going to have to be patient, and they're going to have to be aware of these moments and try not to get too frustrated when they come up, like Palace game. Hopefully they can bounce back against City, and we'll see. So let's talk about the team that they may look to play. So if it is a strong team, I expect Vicario to play in goal. I probably expect Porro. You'd think maybe Dragozin comes in, just because he was signed obviously for quite a lot of money. He's not just coming as he's young, but he's not that young. He will be expecting game time, and I fancy him to play in this game, probably along with Van der Ven, and probably a doggy rather than Gray, but that's a possibility. Midfield, I think we're quite strong. Maybe Bentancur comes back in. Maybe perhaps Sarr starts this one. I still think Kulusevski should play in a game like this. So those would be the three that I would go with. And then up front, it's a bit tricky, isn't it? I think Solanke probably starts over Richarlison. I know Richarlison's desperate for game time, but if he's going to go strong, Solanke, it feels like the one to go for. Johnson, I'm pretty sure, I imagine, will be on the right. And then on the left, obviously, Son looks like he's not going to make it. Werner's sort of dropping down the pecking order and out of confidence. Obviously, Odebear's injured, so I think maybe Mikey Moore keeps his place, but that'd be a lot. 3 games in a week for a 17-year-old. We'll see. I mean, that could be a lot. Maybe Richarlison comes in off the left, or maybe it's Werner. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm expecting quite a strong team, as I say. So we'll see on that. Just on some other subjects. One is on Richarlison. Some comments that I've made the back page of my paper, The Sun, today, about Vinicius Jnr. Saying branding the decision not to give Vinny Jr. the Ballon d'Or embarrassing. And he does, to be fair, he does say Rodri's a great player and deserves to be among the greats. Obviously, Rodri won the Ballon d'Or in the end. But you're basically just having a whine, really. That's why his fellow Brazilian didn't win and said it was for reasons no one can understand, and said he was the best in the world kid, I think in a social media post. But to be honest, listening to that and reading that, it feels a bit like it's the kind of thing that Richarlison would normally respond on his own social media to people having a moan with the phrase "cry more." I mean, yes, Vinicius Jr. could have been a worthy winner, but Rodri definitely was as well. I mean, it's a sort of toss-up. I mean, Vinicius Jr. obviously helped win the Champions League. He's been an unbelievable player. He's definitely one of the best players in the world. But Rodri, I mean, guy won the Euros. He won the league again. He lost one game. He's just an unbelievable player. So I think they're both worthy winners. And Real Madrid not turning up to go to the ceremony in sort of protest was just pathetic, to be honest. So that's the way I feel about it. But anyway, yeah, Richarlison sort of making the news over his support for his fellow Brazilian forward. Just an interesting topic. And then finally, obviously Ruben Amorim has been a big talking point of late, with Man United looking like they're going to appoint him, and it just got me thinking about that game in in Lisbon, for Sporting Lisbon against Spurs a couple of years ago. I was at the game, and just a few reflections on that match. Really, I mean, first of all, I remember being that all of those group games in that Champions League season, and the Milan game as well, were at just amazing stadiums where you could barely hear yourself think. So obviously you had Lisbon, you had Eintracht Frankfurt, you had Marseille. Wow, I mean the sort of firecrackers that went off outside that ground, and then obviously San Siro as well. Unbelievable moments I won't forget. Sporting was the first one, and actually I remember I wasn't exactly passively high, but trust me, there was some smells coming across the press box from the fans standing nearby, which were quite notable at the time. And that was the first defeat that Spurs suffered that season. About sort of 8 games in, after a really good start under Conte. But to be honest, that performance and that defeat kind of was a bit of a window into what was to come. They weren't great, Spurs. They did lose by 2 goals conceded in the 90th minute, which made for a very swift rewrite. Just through a window into what it's like as a journalist. You know, you're doing a match, particularly at night. The deadlines mean that you have to file your whole report by 90 minutes, if not before, so they can make it into print to get around the country in time, which can make for a quite frantic few moments if there are late goals that change the context, and that would definitely be one of those. And it's not something that everyone could do. It's definitely not. It's not like I'm talking about brain surgery or something really stressful, but it's something that you have to think quite quickly on your feet over. And that definitely was one of those games. But to be honest, Spurs were second best throughout the game. Marcus Edwards, the old Spurs old boy, was fantastic. I think he almost scored an unbelievable wonder goal. And Amorim before the game, I remember in the pre-match press conference, had talked him up for England. And he's someone that obviously has developed brilliantly under Amorim there. And Pedro Porro was in that game as well for Sporting. And yeah, I mean, Spurs were just second best, and it kind of, as I say, was a bit of a window into later down the line when they would just be trying to grind out results, keep it tight, and it wouldn't work really. And that was kind of how it all sort of ended really for Conte going forward. But Amorim was very impressive character. I mean, he spoke flawless English in his sort of big white T-shirt, white trainers. His team was super organised. Obviously, that 3-4-3. I know Spurs have sort of looked at him before as of all the big clubs. He's one of the hottest properties, as they say, in European football management. And I'm excited to see him come to Man United. I think he could be a bit of a mini Mourinho, not in terms of tactics, but in terms of how he conducts himself, which should be quite good fun. And for Spurs, I mean, look, this is what people talk about when they talk about Ten Hag coming in. That they've got a exciting manager who's done well in these sort of relatively minor leagues compared to the Premier League. So look, it might turn out to be the same situation. I mean, they're doing brilliantly. Sporting Lisbon have won every game this season, and he's turned them around brilliantly. But it's not the same as the Premier League, so we'll wait to see. But I think this might not be great news for Spurs because, in these last few years, other clubs have been able to make hay while United have been going through just a disastrous phase. And I think Ten Hag was a big part of that. But if Amorim's what I think he might be, then United in the coming years could be coming back to the table, which means just another competitor for Tottenham in that kind of little sort of enclave of teams below City, Liverpool and Arsenal. Chelsea obviously looking good at the moment. Newcastle kind of dropped off, to be honest, but it's still a very difficult team on the day. Villa looking great. So suddenly the Premier League, if Man United come back to the party, the competition is so fierce at the top and just below it, which will only sort of add more of a challenge to Postecoglou in these coming years. But how exciting to have that kind of challenge, and with the football that we know Spurs can play under him, they have every chance of being in amongst it if they continue to stick with it and they continue to build and try to learn from the defeats like they did at Palace and try to sort of stand them out as they can go along. But there are going to be more of those bumps in the road, as I said at the top. But look, let's see tonight against City. This could be a huge night in the whole Postecoglou project, and a big night for Tottenham. So I'll speak to you after the game.